Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guest today is Nava Atlas. She has written a book called Vegetariana, and I thought it was a big deal to publish a 10th anniversary edition of my book on process. Well, let me tell you something about this book. It's been almost 40 years since the original publication. We're going to talk about what's different, and let's welcome her to the show. First of all, I love purple and green. They're my two favorite colors. So right there, it's an eye-catching book.
These two colors work very well together.
They're my favorites. So 40 years ago, were there even vegans out there yet?
Vegan had existed. People called it other things. I think the term vegan was coined in the 1940s now I'm not going to remember the American Vegan Society or the British one. But before that, if there were vegans, it was called the natural diet. And, Percy Shelley and his wife, Mary Shelley, who was the author of Frankenstein, they followed a vegan diet. It just wasn't called that. When I wrote the book, it was really, like I said in the title of the show, even vegetarians were considered weirdos in the early 1980s.
That is something. Wasn't it Donald Watson that coined the word vegan? Why do I think that name was Donald Watson?
Yes, no, you're right about that.
Wow. Well, so, okay, look, you don't look like you've been doing, you must have started when you were like 2 or 3 or 4. I mean, what made you decide to go vegan, vegetarian way back then? Because I would have been 22, 40 years ago. And I had been vegan for 5 years, but I didn't call it vegan back then. I called it vegetarian, even though I was vegan. I don't think I even knew the word 40 years ago.
I definitely didn't. And like I said, being a vegetarian back then was challenge enough. So I wanted to be a vegetarian ever since my early teens. And it was really unusual back then. And I begged my mother first to let me cook so I could disguise the meat, because I think that she wouldn't have let us just do no meat. But after a couple of years, I thought, I just can't deal with this anymore. And I didn't know why. I just didn't like to look at it on my plate. I'm also obviously, now that I'm a visual artist, and so I'm very visually oriented. And I just didn't like how it looked on the plate with I don't want to get graphic here, but And so then after that, I insisted that I cook vegetarian for my brother and myself. And that didn't go over very well either. But then after a few years, everybody wanted what we were having, which is almost like now when you take a beautiful vegan dish to a party, everybody wants to try it. So back then the family once they saw the food, and the food wasn't nearly as delectable as it is today, they wanted to try it and they really enjoyed it.
When I think about the last time I had a mixed Thanksgiving with carnivores, the one thing I noticed was on their plate was basically different shades of brown. From the turkey to the gravy to the stuffing, they had basically a brown or a beige plate, and my plate was all colors. It's the plants that make other things beautiful and tasty, in my opinion.
Oh, and that reminds me. So back then, when my husband and I were invited to any sort of gathering, Thanksgiving or otherwise, when they found out that we were vegetarians, that was such a big freak out. Like, what are we going to feed these people? It was such a calamity. So I feel like, I always feel like the world has not gotten better since the 1980s, I'm afraid, or the 90s. This is really the one area I feel that we've evolved, because it has gotten so much more mainstream. You go almost anywhere and you can get vegan options, or there will be a fully vegan eatery, even in places where you don't expect it to be.
Absolutely. But how did you get a publisher interested 40 years ago?
Oh, that was, I was really a very naive young artist. I was working as an illustrator and a graphic designer. That's how I was trained. That's what I graduated from school with. And I moved to New York City with my gigantic portfolio. And I was really shy, really, really shy. And back then there was no email, so we'd have to cold call if we wanted to see an art director. And I think after a few years of doing that, I went to a lecture by someone who said that if you're a freelancer, you should really think of doing something that's all your own, because otherwise you're going to be living from job to job and check to check for the rest of your life. And I thought, that's a really good idea. My husband was so happy to go vegetarian, and I would make all these concoctions, and he'd start telling me, well, write this down so you can make this again. So after a year or two, I had a lot of recipes. I'm a major nerd. I love literature. I started to collect all the sayings and aphorisms that are in the book. And I had this idea. Basically, it was, kind of the same design that you see today, but now it's, updated. And I really didn't know what to do. Again, everything was calling, which for me was torment because I was so shy. So I sent it to one publisher and they liked it. They kept it for 6 months and then they turned it down. So then I heard of agents and I said, well, I have to get myself an agent and copy, make copies of my proposal, which back then, again, no computers. We had to do everything by hand. My husband took it to a copy shop for me. And the guy behind the desk said, what is this? This looks really interesting. And my husband told him, he said, oh, my girlfriend is an agent. So it was really synchronous. So I called the agent, of course, really with my hand shaking. And I said, well, drop it off at our place and then don't call us, we'll call you. And the next day they called me and said that they would love to represent it. And within weeks, they sold it to one of the top cookbook agents in New York. And the rest, as you say, is history.
Did you design this? Because I mean, the inside, I just love the way it looks.
Yes, I designed it. And again, the design is very much like the 1984 version, but this is the first time that it's been printed nicely because the drawings are really delicate. They have a lot of detail. And it was always printed on a kind of a matte paper that soaked the ink, especially the first edition. When it first rolled off the press, you're supposed to cry tears of joy. I cried. They were not tears of joy because these delicate drawings became so dark and they didn't look the way they were supposed to.
What else?
Go ahead. I got the question already.
Yeah, no, what else has changed? The recipes have changed because they were vegetarian at first, right? But now they're completely vegan.
Vegan. Well, some of the recipes are updated versions of the vegetarian ones. And that's something that I've seen from this long perspective that has really changed in these 40 years. Because back then, basically, if you wanted a plant-based milk, unless you made your own nut milks, there was soy milk. And then a few years later, rice milk came along. And now there's just such an array of different types of plant-based milks. I don't even know when vegan cheese made its tentative appearance on the market, but at first it really wasn't good. And now it's really good. Even to the point where you can go into a supermarket and get pretty much anything you need. The produce sections are so much bigger than they used to be, because I think there's just a general interest in people, eating more plant-based, eating more plants, eating more different types of vegetables. Just the array of ingredients, there's just no comparison. I used to get my ingredients at these dusty old, what they call health food stores, which are basically vitamin shops with a few grains and maybe a few wilted vegetables. But I was intrepid. I was really committed to doing this.
It's funny if people say, oh, it's so hard to be vegan. I'm like, you have no idea what it was like 45 years ago. I mean, you've never picked a time in human history where it was easier to be vegan.
Yeah, when people say that, I said, no, it is not. It is so easy. Sometimes you basically just have to make one-to-one swaps with things that are right in front of you at the supermarket. So when people say, well, what's the first thing you should do if you want to go vegan? I said, just make vegan versions of the things you already like. It doesn't have to be exotic. It doesn't have to be expensive. You already like, let's say you like pizza. So make a pizza with vegan cheese and a lot of vegetables on it. And if you must, then vegan pepperoni. It's really that simple.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you raise your children vegan as well?
Well, at first, when we had children, vegan still wasn't quite in the atmosphere, so vegetarian. So I have two very elderly children. And neither of them have ever tasted any kind of meat or fish. But we did start as lacto-ovo, and we all went vegan as a family when they were 10 and 12. So my son, who was 10 at the time, was the first to declare. We took the kids on a little field trip to a local very local, very small dairy farm, because I thought, we're all products of just all the things that we've heard when we grew up. So I thought, can I really raise my kids without milk? So we went to a small local dairy farm. And, after that, my son just couldn't go vegan fast enough, because you can't unsee what you see. Okay, there's cows in the meadow, and it was a beautiful day with the puffy clouds and the green meadow. But then what we saw was off in the distance, the little baby calves in the crates. So I asked the farmer, well, what happens to these little guys? And he said, well, they're going to become veal. So, and I thought, I just don't want to be part of that system. Yeah. So really, within the next week, we all went vegan.
Yeah, people don't think about that, I don't think.
Because they don't want you to think about it. They make sure that you don't think about it.
Yeah, that's something. So this was your very first book, and now you've written many books since then, haven't you?
Many books. I would say that some of them are revised editions. And I think at this point, with my cookbooks and my not cookbooks, it's about up to 20.
That's amazing. I mean, that's like that's like a book every other year.
Exactly. But that's what I've been doing. I feel like I'm a working writer. I've never been like a chef. I've never been a teacher. So I've really been a working writer. And I've also run websites, which is also something that I enjoy doing. I had Veg Kitchen for a long time. And then
I remember that. That was a fantastic blog. I remember that blog.
I was going to say, then I just got this notion to try to sell it. And I really didn't think I would sell it. But then it sold really rapidly before I really had a chance to think about, well, why am I selling this? And then I worked for those people like as a consultant for a couple of years. And then when that ended, I was thinking, I still need a platform, and I still need a place where I want to invent new recipes. So I started the new one, the Vegan Atlas.
Yeah, well, that's cool, because your last name is Atlas, and an atlas is also an atlas.
Right. That's and the tagline is imagining a plant-based planet. So it is about our earth and, our fervent wishes for it to become a more plant-based place.
Yeah. Well, when you have that many books, because I think I'm starting my 4th or 5th now, and it's taken me quite a long time to get that many. Do you have a favorite book?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say that this is probably, especially now in this form, the veganized and beautifully printed. I think my first book still is pretty much my favorite. And I also really like The Literary Lady's Guide to the Writing Life, because that set me yet on another path of being able to deal with and create content around classic literature by women, which is another really one of my great passions. So yeah, that, the Vegetariana and The Literary Lady's Guide, I'll say those are my favorite too.
Okay. Well, it's funny because when I was reading what you sent me for the show notes, I did not know that Rosa Parks was a vegan.
So that's another really interesting thing. And another reason why I wanted to redo this book is because, 40 years ago, I think I did what everybody else did, was just sort of default to the male, default to kind of vote to the male default, I should say. I thought I really, now that I know so much more about women's literature, I want to add more women's voices to it. And so the spread with the famous vegetarians and vegans, which I'll open up to. Where are you? This one. This was a one-pager before, and it featured all men. And I thought, well, that can't stand. And so, yeah, this was a great discovery. Rosa Parks was a vegetarian for 40 years. Coretta Scott King was vegan for the last 10 years of her life. And I don't know if people know, Dexter Scott King is very involved in the animal rights movement, one of their sons. So that was really quite nice to learn. Ellen G. White was somehow involved with the Seventh-day Adventist, which to this day really advocate for a plant-based diet. And who else did I add? I added Cesar Chavez. Some of these people were already there. But yeah, this is like the really nerdy kind of research that I love doing.
That's very cool. Yeah, yeah, all those people do wonderful things in the world, and they happen to be vegan.
Absolutely. Um, so last year, I think when we talked, I did a demo, which I find talking and cooking like so stressful to do at the same time, but I do have a little bit of show and tell here. I've been asked, what other things have changed over the past 40 years. And one of the chapters I worked a lot on changing was the desserts and sweets. They were just too fussy. And, of course, they had eggs and dairy in them. And so, truffles, raw truffles are really, can you see this from your angle?
Yeah, I can see it. They look like
Yeah,
little
so
chocolate balls.
these are date based. So we've discovered that the dates make an amazing base for these type of sweets. And then I veganized one of these salads. It's the salad with the famous little cabbage lady that's on the cover. And I basically just called it colorful cabbage salad, like a hippie, and I just kept that name. And in honor of you, Chef AJ, the recipe calls for vinaigrette. And I thought, I know we're not allowed to do oil, so I just used the vinegar, and it's really good.
Yeah,
I think I'm going to make it this way from now on. It doesn't need oil.
it's fantastic. I love that you did that. Yeah, I wonder when dates really gain popularity in cooking and baking, because I've been using them almost 20 years now. I started using them when I gave up sugar in 2003, and they're so good.
They're so good, and they're so sweet. They're not only it's for the sweetness, but they have a binding quality as well. That's so useful. And another trick I discovered is with baking, having given up eggs in baking, is that applesauce is just fantastic. It's my favorite binder, both for cakes and muffins and cookies, because it helps things stick together. It makes a really tender crumb, and it adds sweetness without additional sugar, or really being able to cut down on sugar.
Yeah, and it also adds moisture where you don't even need oil necessarily. I find that with desserts, people when people eat fake meats or meat analogs, they might say, well, this isn't what I remember, but you can't really tell a vegan German chocolate cake from a regular German chocolate cake. It's not the animal products that make desserts delicious.
Oh, that's true. And that's a really good analogy, because I know that, I wrote a whole book. That's the one we talked about last time, plant-powered protein. And I really didn't like meat. That's why I gave it up. I don't find that these meat analogs really taste like meat. There's just something very hearty about them. And my kids who have never tasted meat really have always loved those. Even before I decided to write that book, they always, anything that was like a vegan burger, or something like Mandarin, what do they call it? Mongolian beef, or anything, the fake Mongolian beef. They always love that sort of thing. And at first it would drive me crazy, but I thought, they have nothing to compare it to. And, I think they just like the hardiness and the texture of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's so cool. I'm guessing that your kids are probably really healthy being raised the way they were.
We're pretty healthy. We're all pretty healthy. Yeah. No, really, very few health issues in this family.
That's great. That is great. Are most of your friends vegan, or do you socialize with everybody?
I socialize with everybody, but I think everybody is very open to it. And our family, I have two older brothers. One of them is vegan, and he was vegan before we were. And the older one, I think, maybe eats fish once in a while. And as far as friends, I don't exclude people, because I feel like, when they come here, they discover new things. They're always asking, oh, well, what is this? And then where'd you get it? So I know that they're going to go to the store and try that as well. So, but when we have our Thanksgivings or Passover, and before COVID, we would rotate between each other's houses. I can't tell people what to have or not to have at their house, but when they come here, they know there's not going to be any meat or fish on the table, and they're okay with it. Nobody ever leaves hungry.
Yeah, that's great. What is the Literary Ladies Guide? You have that, so it's like you have two blogs, and I love your current blog. That I was looking at the recipe for that chilled melon soup, and it's so easy for this time of year to make a soup like that.
Just did a massive roundup of cold soups, because I just love them in the summer. And the photos I use our dear friend, Hannah Kaminsky, as my
Oh my
photographer.
God, she's doing that. She did the photos for Unprocessed. She's doing my next book. Boy, she is like, she's an amazing artist. You know, she did, you had a book. I remember the first book I have of yours. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It had a really amazing dessert recipe. Oh, I can't remember, with apples. I cannot remember right now, but she did pictures for you before, hasn't she?
She's done, she came along a little bit later simply because I think I started writing these books before she was born, literally.
Or maybe it was Susan Voisin that did pictures for it. Did Susan?
Yes, Susan Voisin.
That's the one. You have a recipe. It's a dessert recipe, and I want to say it's like apples and butternut squash.
Probably not for dessert. It might be like a roasted dish.
Okay, well, for me it was dessert, but I remember that recipe of yours. Maybe it was like did you do a holiday book?
I did two. In fact, the first one I did, it was in 1990. It was called Vegetarian Celebrations. And it was for that very reason. When holiday time came around, people would always say, oh, my daughter's boyfriend is vegetarian. What am I going to make for him? Like, again, freaking out. What am I going to make for them? So I got this idea to do vegetarian holidays. So that was Vegetarian Celebrations. Then years later, I'm trying to think of what year, 2011, it was Vegan Holiday Kitchen. That's the book that Susan Voisin photographed.
That's the one. That's the one for sure.
Yeah. And it's not a revised version of Vegetarian Celebrations. It's really much, much different. And the recipes are all different. So this is sort of like, there's a lot of new recipes in here, but basically it is the old Vegetariana veganized, whereas that one is a much different book. Yeah, I was going to say about Hannah, she's like my kid's age. So it's just really so cool to be working with her. And we're like very simpatico. She's in Austin, I'm in upstate New York. And it's like we really can read each other's minds.
Yeah, she's amazing. I know you see yourself mainly as a writer, but have you ever taught cooking, or do you ever speak at well, we haven't had events in years, but when they had Veg Fest and things like that?
I maybe like to speak at libraries and do demos. So I have done that. And I really enjoyed that. As much as like last year when we couldn't do live demos, I just found the whole idea of demoing and not being able to see the people. It's like, it's like you don't get that feedback, so to speak. But yeah, I did that. I don't know if I'll go back to it because right now it's hard to envision yet the post-COVID future.
Yeah.
I've did a lot of talks with food and demos. I can't say it's my favorite thing, but I do like it because most of the people who come, especially to the library talks, are not vegan. They may not even be vegetarian, but they're coming as a friendly audience because they really want to learn. So people don't come and challenge me and say, oh, why are you doing this? Why are you saying this? They genuinely want the new information. So I feel like for that, it's really very valuable. So maybe I'll make myself do it in the post-COVID future.
I love that. That sounds like a movie, the post-COVID future. But I agree with you about libraries. That's why I like speaking at Veg Fest, because they're generally not there to challenge you because they knew what they were getting into.
Yeah. Well, the reason I like libraries is also I'm the only speaker, whereas Veg Fest, there's so many things going on. And as an introvert, I find it really sometimes quite overwhelming. So with the libraries, it's just me and the audience. And, if you say you're serving food, people will come. It's amazing how, people come in droves to see these talks. So it's really quite satisfying.
Especially if it's free food, huh?
Free food, absolutely.
That's one thing I've always done, at 45 years as a vegan, rather than try to shove it down people's throats. Whenever I went to things because I'll take conferences that aren't vegan, like maybe writing workshops or comedy workshops. And one of the things, when we would break for lunch, I would always look for the vegan restaurant and I go, hey, if you eat vegan, I'll pay. And boy, they would, Yeah.
And what I found interesting is that the vegan meals on airplanes always look so much better than the ones that they serve everybody else. And I can't tell you how many people look longingly at the vegan meal that I've ordered. And I thought, well, maybe that also is planting a seed.
Gosh, it's been so long since I've been on an airplane in general, but especially one that's long enough for them to serve food.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait for that to happen. I don't like airports, but I can't wait to get on an airplane again because that means I'm going somewhere other than my house.
That's so funny. Where you live, do they don't they have a veg fest where you live? I seem to remember that area having veg fests.
An hour and a half north of New York City. And I think there is a really large veg fest, one throughway exit south of here in Newburgh. And there are probably others that I'm not thinking about. I mean, actually, there was one in Kingston that I did just before COVID. And I did a demo and everything. It was really it was their first annual, and then COVID happened. But it was really a good one. They got a great turnout.
Yeah, their first and their last, huh? Hopefully,
We'll come back at some point. We'll hope.
Hopefully, there won't be their last. Do you have any plant-based doctors in your area?
I don't know, and that's because I rarely go to a doctor, and so I'm not tuned into that.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, but it's
go for my annual checkup, and that's it.
That is amazing. Let me look at something right here that I wanted to ask you about. When you started your blog, there wasn't a lot of blogs back then. You were like one of the first people, I think, blogging, weren't you, for vegan recipes?
Yes, it was Vegetarian at the time. The full title was In a Vegetarian Kitchen. It was shortened to Veg Kitchen for the URL. And I started it in 1996. And it was one of the first food sites. I don't know what gave me the idea. I'm not like a natural techie. I'm not a technophobe, but I don't know. I just got this idea and I did it. It started very small and it grew from there. It grew a lot from there. It grew to the point where, and now one of the things that has happened is there are countless vegan blogs. Back then, I was probably the only vegetarian food site. Now there are more vegan blogs than you could possibly count. I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with this?
I was saying you were one of the first blogs I remember, and I do really remember your blog before I met you.
So by the time I sold Veg Kitchen, it was getting 800,000 visits during November for Thanksgiving. So, I see this long view, and just seeing how this has really changed and grown over the years. It's been really incredible.
I made one of the recipes from this book before, but I just moved, so my kitchen's not set up. And I made the Russian beet borscht, and it was excellent. And I didn't even use the agave or sugar. It didn't need it. It was, the beets and the apples, it really didn't need any extra sweetener.
Oh, I love borscht. I decided for Passover, I was so in the mood for borscht. I thought, borscht goes with matzo balls. But I thought, oh, you know what? We'll just go for it. And it didn't exactly go, but it didn't not go either. That's what's fun about experimenting with food.
Can you make your own vegan matzo balls?
I think that my vegan matzo balls are sort of internet famous. The thing with matzo balls, regular matzo balls, is you have to boil them and they're held together by the egg. And then if you don't have egg in it, I think some other, food writers and bloggers may have figured out how to do the boiling method without them falling apart. But I've always been kind of scared to do that. No, actually, I did try one and they did indeed fall apart. So mine are baked. So it's not exactly traditional, but it's so easy. And they're really good and they taste like matzo balls. They're not like the big fluffy kind that people's grandmothers might have made or great grandmothers, but they definitely do, and they're very easy to make. They're kind of foolproof.
Do you make a simmis as well?
Yes, simmis is definitely on the agenda, both for Passover and for Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, so I have those recipes are also on my site as well as in Vegan Holiday Kitchen.
That is fantastic. That's very clever how you figured that out.
I think at a certain point I was talking to one of our local vegan chefs who has a really cute place in New Paltz called Karma Road. And we were talking about that. And I said that I'm really having trouble figuring out a way to get my matzo balls to stick together. So I have to credit him. He said, what about quinoa? Because suddenly quinoa became an okay food for Passover. So I hold them together actually with quinoa flakes or just very mushy quinoa. Because sometimes people can't get quinoa flakes, but quinoa flakes are actually available now, kosher for Passover. I find it really interesting, and why the holiday piece is so important is that people who don't normally keep kosher during the year, it's very important for them to keep the tradition of Passover. And, not just Passover, but other holidays. It's, the nostalgia, it's the feeling of, things were less complicated back then, maybe thinking of a favorite grandmother or aunt. So these food traditions really take us back to places in our life that may have been more comfortable, may have been happier. So that's why I feel like these are really important and a really important piece.
Do you ever make your own matzah? I've done that once. It's fun.
No, that I have not tried. I know one of my nephews did it with his daughter. So that's interesting. I'd like to try at some point, but I haven't tackled that yet.
Yeah, that is very fun. Do you have a favorite recipe, either in this book or any of your books, or one that you're most proud of?
Well, I wouldn't say this is one I'm most proud of, but I would say the recipe I make most often is my semi-famous tofuna, which is so easy that it's barely a recipe. And I can't tell you, I've done these at demo. I've done it. So basically it's baked tofu, the kind that's really firm and flavored. And so you mush it up, you combine it with vegan mayo, celery, and I put nutritional yeast in it. So 3 must-do ingredients. Nutritional yeast is optional, but very highly recommended. And either, sometimes scallion or chives. I usually don't put that. So whenever I do this at demos, people say, oh, you should go into business. You could sell this. I said, listen, this has 3 ingredients. You can really do this. I don't have to go into business for this. So that's the one I probably do most often. And other than that, I don't know that I have a favorite particular recipe, but I think soups are my favorite category, followed very closely by salads. But I just love soups. And as you know, I did write a whole book, which also evolved and evolved. It started as vegetarian, maybe the early 90s. And then it was picked up by I self-published it, and it was picked up by a publisher. Then it went out of print and I veganized it. Again, I self-published it. Then it went to a publisher again, and now it's about to go out of print again. And I'd really like to do a 5th edition with all the beautiful photos that Hannah has taken over the years of my soups, including those 3 fruit soups she did recently.
Yeah. Are you using the Instant Pot at all these days?
I don't use an Instant Pot, but I recently got an air fryer and I absolutely love it. And it is really cut down. I really wanted to cut down on oil. So it's amazing. I'm still feeling like I'm learning how to use it well, but I find that I'm using it a lot. I love roasted vegetables. And so by the time you heat up the oven, that takes 15 minutes. And then to roast them, it's 25 minutes. In the air fryer, it's like 5 minutes. I practically burn things when I leave them in for 6 or 7 minutes. So I find it's just amazing.
I love the air fryer. That and the Instant Pot are my favorite. You mentioned nutritional yeast. I don't even remember nutritional yeast being around 40 years ago, let alone maybe 20. Do you remember it?
I don't remember when it first became popular. I don't remember when the apple cider vinegar with the fermented apple cider vinegar. That's the thing why it's so much easier nowadays with so many products and so many things that are really good for us. And being able to go to the supermarket or the health food store and get a jar of kimchi, which I love. That was my COVID project. I actually learned how to make kimchi, and I thought, I just don't have time. I can't be bothered, but I love kimchi. And again, would be, probably kimchi was sold, and kimchi isn't always vegan, as you know. So I'm not sure what's in it that's not vegan. Maybe fish parts or something. But now it's so easy to get vegan kimchi just about anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Your other blog, the Literary Ladies Guide, who would be interested in that one?
Well, apparently a lot of people are interested because the first, I would say, let's see, 4 years. It was like really in a death spiral. Then, I think it was when this country started lurching to the right that suddenly it took off, because I think women's voices became even more important to acknowledge. So this is a website that's used by a lot of universities. I didn't plan for this or anything, and now I have some also amazing contributors from all over the world. About the authors on it, my one rule is that they have to have passed on, because more women write today. More women are successful at writing today. But back then, there were a lot of challenges to become not only to be a woman writer, but to be a successful woman writer. And I love reading these books. Like I said, I'm a major nerd. And some of them are authors that should be well known. Some of them are well known already, like Louisa May Alcott and Charlotte Bronte. Charlotte Bronte is my favorite author. But, really reviving voices that are in danger of being forgotten. So it's not exactly a side project anymore. It's really grown tremendously.
Wow. Well, maybe you could write a book that combines your two loves, literature and vegan recipes.
I did. It's called Vegetariana.
I meant another one, though. I meant another one, of course. And that's what we're talking about today. But you know what I mean? I don't know, maybe take one of your favorite books by Bronte and then create recipes based on the book.
Yeah, actually, I was desperate to include quotes by Charlotte Bronte, and it was very few and far between, because basically they ate bread and cake and tea in her books. But I did manage to find something by her and something by Jane Austen that I put in the desserts chapter. But yeah, those books and the diets back then were far from healthy and far from vegan. Although Louisa May Alcott's instance, her father started one of the first vegan communes. It was in the mid 1800s. It was called Fruitlands, but they didn't know how to do it healthfully. So they all kind of got a little bit sick, and they didn't know what they were doing also as farmers. They were basically intellectuals who were trying to run a farm, and they failed, I think, within a year.
Really? So we never know about her being vegan, Little Women author.
Right. I think back then they called it, some form of the natural food diet. They definitely didn't call it vegan, but they did adhere to that. No eggs, no dairy.
No dairy. Wow. What do you think has changed most in the last 40 years in terms of veganism?
In terms of veganism?
Yeah.
First of all, people knowing about it and it being more talked about, and people being able to go to even a fast food place and order something, Beyond or an Impossible Burger. The breadth of ingredients, as we mentioned, and just not feeling like we're weirdos anymore. I think there are probably parts of the country where people might challenge it, but for the most part, I think people admire it a lot more and they want to know about it. So I think it's changed a lot. Like I said, I think that's one of the only good things that has changed over the last 40 years.
We have a comment from a live viewer named Virginia who says brewer's yeast was used by Francis Moore Lappé in Diet for a Small Planet in 1971. But that's not the same as nutritional yeast. It does certainly.
I forgot exactly what it is, but yeah, I do remember that. But it has a very bitter flavor, whereas nutritional yeast is really tasty. It makes food taste better. I think brewer's yeast probably has similar nutritional value, but it doesn't really have the same culinary value or, being really good for the palate.
I don't think it tastes very good from what I remember. You certainly can't use it as a cheese substitute or a cheese flavor.
Definitely not.
Yeah. You want to talk about the recipes that you made and where we can find them in the book, and maybe talk us through them a little bit. And you don't have to give the exact recipe,
Oh, the ones that I made here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's see. The first one, I'll go right to this page, but of course I can't see it without my glasses. So I'll put them on. So basically, this is really very similar to the original recipe that was in the book. It goes with my little cabbage lady who says, when I tell people that I'm a vegetarian, I am always told that cabbages also have feelings. And that's a quote from the playwright, the Irish playwright, George Bernard Shaw. So basically, it was chopped green cabbage, cherry tomatoes, olives. I put some scallion, parsley, grated carrots. And again, the recipe calls for herb marinade. And I said, I'm going to just try it with vinegar today. So I used a combination of apple cider vinegar and rice vinegar, because rice vinegar has such a nice mild flavor, and it's really good that way. And let's see, these are the cocoa date truffles, which consist of dates that have been soaked to make them softer. And then I call for any kind of natural nut butter, almond butter, peanut butter, or other nut butter. The peanut butter is what I had in the house. Then a half a cup of hemp seeds or wheat germ. And I used both. I used half of each. Some good quality cocoa powder, agave or maple syrup. We didn't have agave back then.
Now that I don't remember agave. Agave came when I went to culinary school in 2003. That's when I first heard of agave, and it was actually expensive back then.
And back then there was honey, and honey isn't vegan. But the truth is, I've never liked honey. I just find the sweetness so cloying, and it really overpowers whatever it's in. So I'm glad that, we have moved on to these. And a little bit of cinnamon, that's it. And it goes into the food processor, and, it's becomes like a, mush. And then you make these nice little truffles and put them in the fridge for an hour or so to firm up. I like, I've always really liked easy. And I just really always have wanted to keep it real for my readers. Just do things that you still feel like doing at 6 or 7 in the evening, even if you have had a long day, even if you've just come home from, soccer with your kids or whatever. You have to present things that are really doable. That's something that I've always been committed to doing.
Yeah, I agree with you. If cooking for myself, I like easy. I remember one of my favorite chefs is Chef Eric Tucker from Millennium Restaurant. And I've had him on the show. He's very talented. And I got his book, and the book was the recipes from the restaurant. And I tried to recreate it. And it took me all day. My kitchen was destroyed. And I mean, people that cook like that are amazing, and they're fun to watch and fun to eat their food. But I could never do that.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. A lot of them have restaurants, and if I want to eat that, I go to their restaurant. And it's a real treat, and it's a real art form in itself. But you're right; it's not something that we can all do in the midst of our busy lives. I mean, most people, if they can devote an hour to making dinner, that's already a lot,
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely. Carolyn, who's watching live. Hi, Carolyn. I know you. She says, I followed Nava ever since I decided to go vegan 12 years ago. I remember Veg Kitchen and have her holiday cookbook.
That's so nice. Hi, Carolyn.
Yeah, she celebrates Passover and all the holidays. So it's a very helpful book. Let's see. Wait, so another comment. I've been making her Simmus recipe for the Jewish holidays for many years.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah, I'm having trouble reading the chat today because it's not on my usual screen. I guess I should put my glasses on and not be so vain to read that. If you're having trouble with the bundle, email help@chefaj.com. Yeah. So did you have any idea that 40 years ago you would be doing this still and re-update? And was it your idea to update the book or the publisher?
No, I published it, because I had the rights to it. And at this point, I really didn't want to give the rights up to this one. Although I have to say, I don't think any publishers were going to be clamoring for it. Publishers generally don't really like republishing things that have already been out of print. It's different if it's in print and, you're updating it. But, because of all the drawings and everything that's in it, I just really didn't want to give up the rights to it. I didn't think I would be doing this in the first place. Like I said, I was trained as an illustrator and graphic designer. It's how I started my career. I have designed and illustrated a lot of my books, a lot of my cookbooks, and most of my non-cookbooks. I think I illustrated and designed all of them. This really set me on an unexpected path, because in as much as it was poorly printed, it did very well from the get-go. I've been thinking about that period, that time period, and how there were really, and I really tried, I looked very hard at how many vegetarian authors had broken into the mainstream. And basically I counted 12, including Molly Katzen, with the Moosewood books and Enchanted Broccoli Forest. That was in the 70s. And Anna Thomas, who did the Vegetarian Epicure books. Both of those were hugely successful and sort of set the stage for the 80s group, which included me. And then a couple of years after me came Deborah Madison, and her books were also very popular. But there were really very few of us. But I really didn't expect to be doing this. I guess I expected to be a writer and a visual artist. But this is also writing. Writing about food is also writing, because you have to write about it well and write about it in a way that makes people want to read it and, make the recipes and subscribe to the philosophy and the lifestyle.
Yep. Here's how do we get the book? I've been posting links in the chat, but I'll also post it in the show notes, so you can just click on that. And I saw a question from Kathy. So your books are more than recipes. You mentioned for your readers, I'm intrigued with your calmness. I will definitely look into the book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I would say that the later cookbooks became a little bit more conventional in that, this has a lot of writing and, the anecdotes and the illustrations, and it's very, kind of quirky and whimsical. And, I thought, oh, here's Che Guevara. I managed to work in a lot of people that I like into it, like him and Karl Marx, Charlotte Bronte. So, I was going to say that my other books, some of them may not be quite as writerly, but I always try to write well so that I connect with my readers.
Nice. Let me see if there's any more questions. Do you think you'll write more books after this, or is?
Oh, definitely. I feel like I still have a lot of books in me. I don't know if I'm going to write new cookbooks, but I want to update some of my other ones that are not vegan yet. I like to work on the soups book. I did one called the Vegetarian Family Cookbook. That's a hybrid. It was vegetarian, but there are a lot of vegan options already. That came out in 2004. So I'd like to update that. But I also do visual limited edition books. So yeah, I'm a book person. I think I'm going to write books until the day I die. Wow. Whenever that might be.
When you have that many books, have you ever thought of doing like, how people that do albums, like singers, they'll do like a greatest hits album. Did you ever thought of doing that with your 20 books?
I'd like to do something where they come in a box. Let's say there's 3 or 4 books that are really kind of a set. So, but yeah, no, I have thought of it. I've gotten rights back to a couple books that I thought I might combine into a bigger book. So yeah, there's going to be a lot coming along still.
And that's a good idea. It's great that you're so passionate about what you do.
Well, I feel very lucky. I feel like, I get out in the morning and get to work on things that I really enjoy and are still very engaging for me.
Let's see. Okay, so yeah, how do you get the book? I'm posting the link. When things open up, do you think you'll go back to your library lectures?
Part of me doesn't want to, but part of me, like I said, there's just so much gratification knowing that you're not preaching to the choir. You're preaching to a friendly audience, but it's not preaching to the choir. So people are really acquiring new knowledge, learning about new foods, purchasing the book, maybe going home and making things. And, I tell people at these, I think this is very important. I'm an animal rights vegan, but people just don't like to be hit over the head with that right away. So I tell them that as far as climate change, this is the one thing that everybody can do. We can call up our senators and our congressmen and tell them about, fossil fuels and blah, blah, blah. But, that's really very much out of our control. But this is something that everybody can control and contribute to. Any reduction in the use of animals really helps to mitigate climate change. And people like that message. People are very, very receptive to it.
Absolutely. Kathy said, is your holiday book the one that has the most Jewish recipes?
Definitely, yes. Vegan Holiday Kitchen. I have sections for Rosh Hashanah, Passover, and Hanukkah. Not the kind of more minor holidays and festivals, but those three.
Yeah. Here's a question from Kathy. When you cook, do you do mise en place or are you just a whirlwind around the kitchen?
Mise en place for sure. Yeah. I don't like making messes. I do make messes, but then I like to clean them up right away.
I think that mise en place, which I remember culinary school, it's like the first thing you learn. That is, I don't know how people make a recipe without it. You would be walking, you'd spend like an hour walking all over the place for what you need.
Not only that, is before I started doing that really much more religiously, I would start a recipe and then realize I don't have one of the key ingredients. You're in the middle of it already. You go to the pantry, it's like, oh, I'm missing, X, Y, and Z. So, it is a really good idea.
It really is. Susanna says, did you ever consider writing a book on your life story? She finds it's very motivating for new vegans. And Jean says, I agree. Your autobiography would be very interesting.
Oh my gosh, that is so flattering. I think of myself as being such a kind of quiet, introverted, boring person. I had the most boring childhood, but I give it some thought. Maybe I'm more interesting than I think. I tend not to think about myself too much. I'm very outwardly directed. But thank you. That's very flattering.
Donna wants to know, do you know Roberta Kalichowski? She was Micah Publishers and just passed away. She wrote the Vegan Haggadah.
Oh, no, I'm not familiar with that, but that sounds wonderful. I think I'll look it up. Will that be in the show notes or in the chat?
No, yeah, in the chat, Donna just posted it.
Okay, no, I definitely want to look that up.
Wow, that's really interesting. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble seeing the chat today, so I had to go to a different screen than the one that I usually use, and I don't want to miss anybody's question or comment. But it's very frustrating, and I can't talk to customer service in the middle of the thing. Do you do any kind of batch cooking?
No, because we're a very small household now, and sometimes I find that when I put something in the freezer, a year later, I'll think, why is this still in the freezer? So no, I like to just pretty much cook with the seasons and what we need. I'm always really grateful when we have leftovers for the next day because I like having leftovers for breakfast.
I like leftovers too. I just moved, so I'm in a new place, and I think that's how I'm gonna meet people. Once I start cooking, I'm just gonna go and bring them food.
Oh, that's so nice. Is that why you can't find your glasses?
Yeah, exactly. I finally found my clothes today. So isn't that funny? Isn't that funny?
I just noticed how well you match the cover of the book with the purple and then the green.
It's just really funny. I find that this is visually stunning because those are literally my two favorite colors, purple and green. And it's very eye-catching.
I wanted it to reflect the original cover, but not be the original cover. And it was really a quandary for a while. My daughter really helped me a lot with this design. And it really does reflect the older cover and the typography, but looking more contemporary.
And I love the font. And did you do all the drawings in there? Every single one?
Oh, the drawings? Yeah, for sure. I did all the drawings.
Do you still do art? Do you still do art? I love this one. I love this one.
Thank you. I had to do about 20 new drawings for it. And I have to say that the cooking was easier, the writing was easier, the drawing was harder. I don't know what it was. It was maybe the eyesight, the patience, because these drawings really require a lot of patience. But I did it, especially when it had to be a likeness of somebody like Maya Angelou. I don't know what page she's on, but sometimes I'd have to throw it out and do it 2 or 3 times before I was satisfied. Karl Marx, I nailed on the first try. He's easy.
Nice. I am so sorry about the chat today. There's another Roberta that does Jewish cooking. The one that I've seen speak with Milton Mills. It's a different. I looked up Roberta Kalichowski, who wrote the Vegan Haggadah. But there's another Roberta. Do you know her? She's sometimes.
Well, I know I know another Roberta, but I'm not sure if it's the one you're thinking of, Roberta Schiff.
Yeah, that's it. She's the one that's.
Oh yeah, she does Hudson Valley Vegans, and I do know her.
She speaks
Yeah.
with Dr. Milton Mills sometimes on Summerfest. They do like a presentation, like a biblical, are we meant to eat meat? And I guess he does the Christian part and she does the Jewish part.
See, I didn't know about that about her. I just really know her as the organizer of Hudson Valley Vegans, which I've spoken at also. Yeah, she's great. She's still so active.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, I posted the link on Amazon, but are there other places to get the book?
Bookshop is a good one. It's good because we support independent bookstores, bookshop.org.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And where, as they say, wherever books are sold, you go into your local bookstore and they'll order it for you as well.
Wherever fine books are sold. Is there Kathy wants to know, is there a Karl Marx quote or recipe in the book?
Oh, not a recipe, because he had a terrible diet. He was very unhealthy. He was not a vegetarian or a vegan, but he was one of the first people who recognized when England went from like an agrarian society to a meat-based agricultural society, how inefficient that was. And his quote was, in these prisons, animals are born and remain there until they're killed off. And when he saw how the animals were living, even back then, he called it disgusting. So he recognized what a bad system this was, an animal-based food system was, because he was all about the economics. He was not able probably to put into practice what, his philosophy. He was always very poor and very unhealthy.
You seem like, if you weren't doing what you're doing, you seem like a natural teacher.
I've worked with interns. I really like working with young people. But the truth is that people, because I'm a natural introvert, people exhaust me. So I feel like doing my books is sort of my way of teaching. And it's more effective and efficient for me.
Yep. Lissa says, Nava is a marvelous resource. Bravo. It's funny because I'm an introvert, but people just assume I'm an extrovert. You know what I mean? Because
yeah, I'm no longer shy. I mean, I used to be, as I mentioned before, I used to be very, very shy. I'm no longer shy, but I still have that introvert. And also I'm very happy to be, living in my head and thinking about these things and creating things. So yeah, that's sort of the space where I'm most comfortable.
And that says, haha, people exhaust me too. They really do. Like especially when I used to do conferences, like my energy would just get so depleted, like in large groups. I like small groups, like one other couple to three other couples. Like that's perfect for me.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
Yeah. Well, then if you come to California, you can be one of the other two couples. I'd love to cook for you. Well, thank you so much. I wish you every success with this beautiful book. And I appreciate you coming on the show. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when we have another fabulous guest named Kara Levy, who is going to be making a Mother's Day brunch. Now, what are you doing tomorrow for Mother's Day, Nava?
Well, my kids are going to be here. And I had a birthday recently. Whenever it's an occasion, my son, who was our first vegan in the family, has really grown up to be a great cook. So he volunteers to make things. And then, a couple of other family members will be stopping by as well. So it'll be nice. Well, but celebration.
Well, happy Mother's Day. And thanks for coming on the show.
Take care.